And to this end, on the agenda this afternoon is a statement by the Prime Minister. I know our Honourable Prime Minister is not here as yet, but I know Leader of Government Business will pass the message on. Section 11 gives him 12 minutes in which to make a statement, which in the Speaker's mind is too short to address the seriousness of the situation we find ourselves in as a country. So we have decided, I have looked at the situation and I have decided that the PM will at least use half an hour for his statement this evening. There are, and I expect there will be questions that will be asked of him. I am asking...
Madam Speaker, do you think that is a discretionary issue where the Speaker is concerned? Madam Speaker, the issue is that the standing order is clear. So it's not a discretionary issue where the Speaker decides before the issue arrives in front of the Madam Speaker. The issue is that the Prime Minister can be afforded an hour, even though the standard order said 12 minutes. But if the Prime Minister comes and needs more time than the 12 minutes, then the Speaker allows. But we can't take a decision before we have reached there, because maybe the Prime Minister's time that he needs might be 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Member, and I am aware of the situation. However, what it is that I'm trying to establish in the Parliament is a smooth and efficient running. At the end of the statement by the Prime Minister, as with all other ministers, there are questions that will arise. And my position is that in this situation, there is a serious position that faces all of us. However, we have to balance, do a proper balancing act between the right of us, right of members to ask questions and the right of us as a parliament and the nation to complete our business. There is an agenda we would like to complete. We would all like to get home in this uncertain weather before too late. We also have members, people who work on the staff of Parliament that have to get home to other areas. So I can assure you, Member, that I have every regard for the fact that the Prime Minister might have more, need more time, and if it is so, I certainly will, in my discretion as a Speaker, allow him. However, we have to be aware that we have to balance this thing properly, because we have business that we have to get through. So I'm mindful and I thank you and I respect that, but I just want us to know and listen carefully to the questions that are asked by your colleagues, so that if the question you are going to ask is similar to your situation, you don't get up and repeat it in another fashion and we are here until 12 o'clock tonight. That is what I'm trying to deal with. The other matter, I think as members, even although we are careful about ourselves, we have to also have consideration for members of the parliamentary staff who have to get home in other areas too. And I really would like us, I certainly have every regard for the Prime Minister, and I certainly will give him all the latitude that he deserves as the Prime Minister, but we have to balance the situation properly so that we can all get home safely. The other matter that I would like to bring to the attention of the members is that the questions that are set out, that are to be laid before the House, the criteria is set out in section 16. What happens sometimes is that questions come in to the clerk on Tuesday morning. It does not give us enough time for us to vet to see that the criteria are met, and therefore we are asking, if questions are to be tabled, we are asking you to try and have them into the clerk by Monday evening so that we can effectively run the Parliament smoothly. I know it sounds a little oppressive, but the general idea is for us to run efficiently and smoothly, and for us to get out of here after sitting in good time. And last but certainly not least, I'm sure the members would like me on your behalf to welcome back the Marshal to the Houses of Parliament, Captain Blake. We thank God that he's back, he's safe, he looks good, he says he feels good, and he tells me his family is well. And that is much to be thankful for at this time, in these challenging times, when so many of us have persons who have not survived the COVID-19. So welcome back, Marshal, and I'm sure we have the full complement of our orderlies here with us this evening, so that also should help us to have the Parliament run smoothly and efficiently. And the requirement about sending your questions in by Monday evening relates also to motions that you would like to have before the Parliament. If you would be kind enough and good enough to have those motions sent into the clerk by Monday evening, then we'll be able to vet them and know that they are all in order, in keeping with the standing orders, and we can move smoothly throughout our sittings. Statements by ministers.
Madam Speaker, there will be a statement by the Prime Minister at a later point in the sitting.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper number 76 of 2020, an annual report of the Office of the Utilities Regulation for the financial year 2019-2020. Ministry Paper number 77 of 2020, an annual report on audited financial statements of Jamaica Deposit Insurance Corporation for the years ending March 31, 2017 to 2018 and March 31, 2019. Ministry Paper number 78 of 2020 and Beach Access and Management Policy for Jamaica Cabinet Decision number 27 of 2020 dated 18th May 2020. Annual reports on audited financial statements of the Hart NSTA Trust for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual reports of the Culture, Health, Arts, Sports and Education Fund for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual report of the Runaway Bay Water Company Limited for the year 2012-2013. Annual report of the Child Protection and Family Support Agency for the year 2016-2017. Annual report of the University of Technology Jamaica for the year 2017-2018. Annual report of the Broadcasting Commission for the year 2019-2020. The Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020 resolution and resolution, and examination of the components of the fiscal policy paper for the financial year 2020-21 interim report, which was laid on the table of the House on the 6th of October 2020.
Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 16th day of October 2020, a bill entitled An Act to Implement the Convention abolishing the requirements of legislation for foreign public documents done at The Hague on the 5th day of October 1961 and for connected matters was passed in the Senate with 12 amendments for which the Senate desires the concurrence of the House. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, CD, QC, JP, President of the Senate.
Madam Speaker, I now ask for your consent that the Senate amendments to the bill shortly entitled the Authentication Foreign Public Documents Act 2020 be now considered and approved.
Consent of the Speaker is given.
Madam Speaker, the proposed amendments have been tabled, so it should be before every member in the House. It isn't? It should be. Could you please check to make sure you have the amendments? You have? Please could it one be shown to the member from St. Andrews South. Madam Speaker, this is the, you got one? Yes. Madam Speaker, the amendments are really to clarify some of the clauses that were passed by this House, in particular, and also to give greater clarity to the meanings in the definition. So, Madam Speaker, in Clause 2, an addition has been put to Subclause 1, where in addition to official documents, a definition of the clauses were deleted and modified for greater clarity. And so both in clauses 4, 6, 20, and 21, the clauses were deleted and a redrafted clause put in their place for greater clarity in support of what the Senate thought would be beneficial to the bill. I have no objections, Madam Speaker, and I urge and ask the House to approve these amendments as moved and by the Senate, and ask for the House to support these amendments.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Petitions, papers, reports from committees,
She is a partner or any company of which he is a director or manager becomes a party to any contract with the government of Jamaica for or on account of the public service, or if he becomes a partner in a firm or a director or manager of a company which is a party to any such contract. And whereas the Member of Parliament for Clarendon Central is chairman of the LMH Publishing Limited, which is engaged in the book publishing and distribution industry. LMH Retail Limited, a retail concessionaire, and LMH Distributors Limited, trading as the Book Nest, a supplier of books, stationery, and school supplies. And whereas the aforementioned entities may from time to time enter into contracts with the government of Jamaica and its affiliated agencies, and whereas the member has disclosed his interest in these entities, be it resolved that this motion be referred to the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. The second motion, Madam Speaker, is whereas subsection 1(g)(i) of section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica requires a member of this Honorable House of Representatives to vacate his seat if in any firm in which he is a director of Mona Rehabilitation Foundation and Monex Limited, which may from time to time enter into contracts with the government of Jamaica and its affiliated agencies. And whereas the member has disclosed his interest in these entities, be it resolved that this motion be referred to the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. The third one, Madam Speaker, whereas again subsection 1(g)(i) of section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica requires a member of this Honorable House of Representatives to vacate his seat if any firm in which he is a partner or any company of which he is a director or manager becomes a party to any contract with the government of Jamaica for or on account of the public service, or if he becomes a partner in a firm or a director or manager of a company which is a party to any such contracts. And whereas the Member of Parliament for Trelawney Southern is a director of SKPD Haulage and Distribution Limited and GSGP Marketing and Production Company Limited, and also a partner in the firm Grayson and Company Attorneys at Law. And whereas the aforementioned entities have from time to time entered into contracts with the government of Jamaica and its affiliated agencies, and whereas the member has disclosed her interest in these entities, be it resolved that this motion be referred to the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, there are a number of parliamentary sessional committees which we intend to put before this Honorable House for its resolution and acceptance. So be it resolved, Madam Speaker, that in accordance with Standing Orders number 68.1 and 70, and notwithstanding Standing Orders 68.3, this Honorable House appoints a Standing Orders Committee comprising the following members. Honorable Marisa Dalrymple Filbert, Chairman. Honorable Edmund Bartlett, CDMP. Most Honorable Mrs. Juliet Holness, MP. Mr. Philip Henriquez, MP. Mr. Mika Davis, MP. Mr. Dwight Siblis, MP. The Honorable Olivia Grange, CDMP. Mr. Philip Paulwell, CDMP. And Dr. Maurice Guy, MP. And be it further resolved, Madam Speaker, that in accordance with the Standing Orders number 68.1 and 70, and notwithstanding Order 68.3, this Honorable House appoints an Integrity Commission Oversight Committee comprising the following members. Honorable Edmund Bartlett, CDMP, Chairman. The Honorable Marisa Dalrymple Filbert, MP. Most Honorable Mrs. Juliet Holness, MP. Honorable Delroy Chuck, QC, MP. The Honorable Pernell Charles Jr., MP. The Honorable Carl Sabuda, OJCD, MP. Oops. Mrs. Marlene Malaho Ford, QC, MP. Mr. Philip Paulwell, CD, MP. And Mr. Mark Golding, MP. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Whereas by virtue of Section 3.1 of the Irrigation Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may by order, subject to affirmative resolution, declare any area specified in the order to be an irrigation area, and whereas on the 13th day of October 2020, the Minister made the Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020, and whereas it is desirable that the Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honorable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020 resolution. The Colbeck Irrigation Order 2020 is hereby affirmed. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Banking Services Amendment Act 2020.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 12 days, as required by Standing Order 87, amendment of standing orders, I will move the following motion. Whereas Section 58 of the Integrity Commission Act, the Act, requires that the standing orders of the House of Representatives be amended to include the terms of reference of the Integrity Commission's Oversight Committee as set out in Section 36 of the Act. And whereas the format of the requisite amendment to the standing orders are prescribed in the fourth schedule of the Act, includes an erroneous reference to Section 34 of the Act in lieu of the aforementioned Section 36. And whereas this error was consequently and inadvertently reproduced in Standing Order 73D of the Standing Order, be it resolved that Standing Order 73DE be amended to remove the incorrect reference to Section 34 of the Act and replace it with the appropriate reference to Section 36 of the Act. And be it resolved that this motion be referred to the Standing Orders Committee of the House of Representatives, which shall consider the following draft amendment with a view to effecting the correction. And provisions, Madam Speaker, for Order 73D, and the amendment would be in respect of paragraph E to delete the words Section 34 and to substitute thereof for the words Section 36.
Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. House Leader.
Public business, the electricity and electrical works registration and licensing regulations 2020 will now be moved by the minister in whose name it stands. And that will be followed, Madam Speaker, by the continuation, indeed the closing of the bill liabilities of the Dogs Liability Act, Act 2020 by the Honorable Delroy Chuck. Madam Speaker, it is intended to have preceding those two, the Colbeck Irrigation Order 2020, which is in the name of the member from Southwest St. Elizabeth and Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, tabled before this Honourable House is the Colbeck Irrigation Order 2020. The National Irrigation Commission Limited, a company incorporated under the Companies Act, is the licensed irrigation authority by virtue of the Irrigation Authority licensing of the National Irrigation Commission Limited Order 2011, made in accordance with Section 4 of the Irrigation Act. The Commission, Madam Speaker, is seeking to expand the areas within which irrigation services are being provided. In accordance with the Act under Section 3(1)(a), I am empowered, Madam Speaker, by order to declare any specified area in the order to be an irrigation area for the purposes of the Act. The Act provides that such an order shall be subject to affirmative resolution. The area, Madam Speaker, to be declared an irrigation area is Colbeck in the parish of St. Catherine. Madam Speaker, this is in keeping with the Ministry of Agriculture's drive to expand the areas in which our farmers have access to water. The Colbeck irrigation system was developed through the Inter-American Development Bank under the National Irrigation Development Program. The irrigation system, Madam Speaker, is located in the eastern region and comprises a subdivision of 95 farm lots on 110 hectares of land, which is located in Colbeck, St. Catherine. These farm lots, Madam Speaker, are occupied by predominantly small vegetable farmers, approximately 97 farmers. The program included developing a well, a production well of the capacity of 1.2 million gallons per day. We also, Madam Speaker, were able to put in pumping equipment, including a turbine, motor, and switchgear, and we dealt with the underground and above ground pressurized pipe network, including water meter, valves, and other works. The Commission will be fully able to execute its mandate once the area is designated an irrigation area. This order, Madam Speaker, gives the Commission the ability to charge and collect for the provision of water, and in essence gives the Commission the authority to provide water to the 97 farmers on the farm lots. The features of the irrigation order are, Madam Speaker, paragraph 1 provides the name of the order. Paragraph 2 refers to Part A of the schedule, which provides a description of the Colbeck irrigation area, as well as Part B of the schedule, which provides for the area as delineated by the map. The schedule to the order, Madam Speaker, Part A, the boundary description of the Colbeck irrigation area, and Part B, a map of the Colbeck irrigation area. Just to indicate, Madam Speaker, the farmers in this area largely grow hot pepper, onions, sweet potatoes, sorrel, cassava, and pumpkin. And you can imagine, having spent the resources to put in the system, are now anxiously awaiting the water to begin flowing through the pipes. With that said, Madam Speaker, I ask for approval of the Colbeck Irrigation Order 2020.
The question before the House is that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
William?
Just need
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to pilot these regulations, the Electrical Work Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020, which are coming here to this Honorable House for a second time. They actually passed in the lower house prior to the September 3 general election, but unfortunately they did not get to the upper house, and therefore they have to be retabled here. As I said, Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to pilot these regulations made pursuant to Section 55(1) of the Electricity Act and entitled Electrical Work Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020. The regulations aim at digitizing, modernizing, and transforming the electrical inspection process and seek to increase regulatory efficiency in relation to electricians. Under the Electric Lighting Act 1980, Madam Speaker, it was a requirement for electricity inspections to be conducted by the government. This was undertaken by the Government Electrical Inspections, otherwise known as GEIs, a department of the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. The GEI, headed by a Chief Electrical Inspector, is responsible for conducting safety inspections of all electrical installations, with only those installations certified being allowed to be connected to the country's electricity system. In August 2015, the Electricity Act was promulgated providing for the privatization of the electricity inspections functions and establishment of a government electrical regulator, a GER. With the passing of the Electricity Act 2015, the Electric Lighting Act 1890 was repealed. Under the Electricity Act, the GER is designated the regulator for the work that is done by the licensed inspectors and registered electricians in relating to electrical installations, wiring, or work. The GER will also have responsibility for vetting license applications from persons desirous of being licensed as inspectors and making a recommendation to the Minister of Energy. The registering of electricians, the monitoring of work done by the electrical inspectors, recommending revocations or suspension of the licenses of electrical inspectors and registered electricians, investigating and seeing to resolve complaints regarding the work or conduct of the licensed electrical inspectors, and conducting random audit of installations certified by licensed electrical inspectors. More particularly, and with respect of the registering of electricians, the GER will appoint a committee of examiners that will assume the functions previously carried out by the Board of Examiners. That is the administration of exams, registration, and electricians. Madam Speaker, it is not my intention to take the members through each regulation, but to direct it to those that I consider most crucial. Regulation 1, citation. Madam Speaker, Regulation 1 gives formal name by which these regulations may be cited. That is the Electrical Work Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020. Regulation 2, interpretation, introduces definitions for several terms used throughout the bill. For example, the terms electrician, inspector, regulator, technical electrical assistant, and work completion certificate are defined. For the purpose of these regulations, Madam Speaker, an electrician means a person who is registered as an electrician under the regulations. An inspector means a person who is licensed as an inspector under these regulations. And a regulator means a government electrical regulator established under the Act. Regulation 3, restriction of application, indicates the regulations are not applicable to A, certain electrical wiring or electrical apparatus in a vessel or motor vehicle, B, an electrical or electromechanical device, apparatus or material manufactured solely for export or imported solely for re-export, and C, and some specific self-contained generating set. Sorry, Madam. Madam Speaker, Regulation 4 establishes the roles of the Minister, Regulator, Committee of Examiners, Inspector, Electrician, and Technical Electrical Assistant. Part 3, Licensing, Registration, and Enrollment. Madam Speaker, Part 3 of the regulations, which encompasses Regulation 5 to 13, establishing the licensing, registration, and enrollment processes. Regulation 5, Madam Speaker, requiring license for a prerequisite to performance of inspection functions and specifies the application process for such licensing. A person may be licensed as an inspector by submitting to the regulator a completed application along with the requisite documents in accordance with Form 1 of the first schedule. The regulator shall review the application upon receipt, and if the applicant has met the requirements, the regulator then recommends to the minister that the license be granted. The subparagraphs of Regulation 5 are also provided for requests for further information, the giving of reasons to the minister for dissatisfaction with an application, and offences in relation to the application process. Madam Speaker, Regulation 6 provides the minister with the discretion to grant or refuse a license. In addition, Regulation 6 speaks to these three classes of license, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3, which may be granted to successful applicants upon payment of the license fee. The distinction between classes surrounds voltage levels and power levels at which the electrical apparatus is to be energized. Regulation 7 Madam Speaker, addresses the duration, terms, and conditions of the license. The license issued by the Minister shall be valid for 2 years unless suspended, revoked, or surrendered, and is non-transferable. Regulation 8, Madam Speaker, requires that upon being granted a license, an inspector is to obtain public liability insurance for the duration of the license from an insurer registered under the Insurance Act. It also specifies the insurance value for each class of license granted. Regulation 9 establishes the right to appeal a decision where a grant of a license has been refused. Regulation 9 also outlines the appeal process. Regulation 10 outlines the circumstances in which a license may be suspended or revoked by the regulator. Regulation 11 stipulates the manner in which a license is to be surrendered, making particular use of a notice to the Minister of the intention to surrender the license as set out in the 4th schedule. Madam Speaker, Regulation 12 speaks to the condition for renewal of a license. A licensee may apply for renewal of the license within 3 months before the expiration of the license, whereas the applicant has completed specified courses by an approved institution, after which the regulator recommends grant of the license. Regulation 13 states that an inspector shall notify the regulator of any change or impending change to the inspector's particulars. Regulation 14 specifies a process for an electrician to be registered in order to undertake an electrical work or modification, or submit an electrical line diagram or electrical design, or supervise technical electrical assistant. A person may be registered as an electrician by submitting to the regulator a completed application along with the requisite documents in accordance with the Form 2 of the schedule. Regulation 15 states that upon the certification of the applicant by the Committee of Examiners and payments of registration fee, the Committee of Examiners may grant the registration in each of the following categories: Category 1, Category 2, Category 3. As was in the case in respect to inspectors, Madam Speaker, the distinction between the categories surrounds voltage levels and power levels at which electrical apparatus is to be energized. The regulator may refuse to grant an application for registration if the applicant is not certified by the Committee of Examiners. Regulation 16 addresses the duration, terms, and conditions of an electrician's registration. The license issued by the Minister shall be valid for 2 years unless suspended, revoked, or surrendered, and is also not transferable. Regulation 17 establishes the right to appeal to the regulator where a grant of registration has been refused. Regulation 17 also outlines the appeal process and the 2 options at the regulator's disposal in terms of making determination in respect of the appeal. Regulation 18 describes the circumstances in which registration of an electrician may be suspended or revoked by the regulator upon recommendations by the Committee of Examiners. The drafting is such that more egregious conduct results in a revocation rather than a suspension. Thank you. 19, Madam Speaker, Regulation 19 requires that an electrician who wishes to deregister must submit to the regulator a form set out in the 4th schedule and relinquish identification issued under Regulation 15.4. Regulation 20 speaks to the condition for the renewal of the registration. An electrician may apply for renewal of registration within 3 months before the expiration of the registration. In determining whether or not to approve the renewal, the Committee of Examiners is required to consider whether or not the applicant for renewal has completed specified courses by an approved institution before registration is granted. Regulation 21 expresses a basic requirement that an electrician shall, as soon as is practicable, notify the regulator of any change or impending change to the electrician's particulars. Regulation 22, Madam Speaker, specifies a process for a technical electrical assistant to be enrolled in order to undertake electrical work or modification under the supervision of an electrician. A person may be enrolled as a technical electrical assistant by submitting to the Committee of Examiners a complete application in accordance with Form 3 of the 1st schedule, together with the application fee set out in the 2nd schedule. Regulation 23 speaks to the duration, addresses the duration, terms, and conditions of the enrollment. The enrollment issued to a technical electrical assistant shall be valid for 5 years unless suspended, revoked, surrendered, and is non-transferable. Regulation 24, with respect to enrollment under these regulations 17 to 20, which relate to appeal against a decision not to grant registration, suspension, or revocation, deregistration, renewal registration, and electrician are applicable to enrollment. Subparagraph 2 creates an offense for the failure to comply. 26, Regulation 26 clarifies that a person can be registered as an electrician and hold an inspector's license. However, an inspector shall not inspect or certify his own work or modification. A person doing so may be liable to a fine not exceeding $5 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Regulation 27 creates an offense if the person fraudulently represents himself to be licensed, registered, or duly enrolled, have performed an activity for which he is not duly licensed, registered, enrolled, that he did not perform. A person who commits the aforementioned offense may be liable to a fine not exceeding $5 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Madam Speaker, Part 4 of the regulations, which encompasses Regulation 28 to 30, treats with the Committee of Examiners and the conduct of examinations. Regulation 28 sets out the composition of the Committee of Examiners and lays down the requisite qualifications for members of the committee. Regulation 29 regulates the conduct of meetings and the decision-making processes of the committee examiners. Regulation 30 requires the Committee of Examiners to conduct examinations of all applications for first-time registration under the regulations. Part 5 of the regulation, which encompasses regulations 31 to 52, treats with compliance with specifications, requirements for electrical work, notification of completion of electrical work, and notification to the owner to proceed to apply for inspection of electrical work. Regulation 31 highlights compliance with the specifications in respect to electrical work or modification of any premises. If for any reason electrical work does not meet the specification, the single buyer, supply licensee, or self-generator may disconnect the electricity supply. Where the electricity supply is not yet provided, the electrician concerned is to replace or remedy the electrical work. Whilst Regulation 32 sets out the requirements for electrical work to be done in connection with the initial supply of electrical power or a modification to any premises, in this instance, an electrical line diagram is to be completed for a generation set that utilizes DC power. In addition, this electrical line diagram or electrical design must be certified by a registered professional electrical engineer under the Professional Engineer Registration Act before commencement of the electrical work or modification. Regulation 33 speaks that upon completing any work or modification, an electrician is to input into the digital system and submit within 48 hours a copy of the work completion certificate. Also, the regulator should notify the owner that he may proceed to apply to an inspector for the inspection and certification of the electrical work or modification. Regulation 34 holds an electrician liable for his own actions and those of any TA under the electrician supervision, and mandates that the electrician is to effect appropriate corrective measures where the electrician A, creates or allows the continued breach of specification, B, issues a work completion certificate that does not comply with the specification. 35, Regulation 35 stipulates that the inspector is to upload to the digital system all information relating to an inspection using an electronic device. Regulation 36 states that upon receipt of notification from the regulator, the owner may engage an inspector to inspect electrician's work or modification. Regulation 37 requires an inspector to issue a compliance certificate upon the assessment of electrical work or modification that complies with the specification and is ready to be energized. Compliance certificates are valid for differing periods of time depending on whether or not the electrical work or modification relates to a public space. Regulation 38 states that an inspector who completes an inspection and is not satisfied with the electrical work or modification is to notify the owner in writing with reasons for the unsatisfactory findings and input the results of the inspection into the digital system. Regulation 39 creates the offense where an inspector certified premises that he has not visited or found to be in breach of the specification. A person who commits the aforementioned offense may be liable to a fine not exceeding $2 million and not exceeding 2 years. Regulation 40 outlines the circumstances in which an inspector may issue a temporary or partial inspection certificate which shall be valid for a period of 90 days, not exceeding 90 days. Regulation 41 states that the regulator may conduct random reviews of electrical work or a modification that has been inspected by an inspector. 42 to 44 encompasses reporting a breach, citing a breach, and rectifying a breach, respectively. Regulation 45 states that within 6 months before the compliance certificate expires, the owner is to engage an inspector to re-inspect the premises. Regulation 46 states that the regulator is to issue at least 2 weeks before the expiration of a compliance certificate a notice of date of expiration of the compliance certificates to the single buyer, supply licensee, or self-generator. Regulation 47 outlines that a single buyer, self-generator, or supply licensee is to engage an inspector to undertake an inspection prior to the interconnection of the system. Regulation 48 mandates that a single buyer, supply licensee, or self-generator should not connect to complain to the regulator and allows the regulator to carry out an investigation and recommend the necessary actions. Regulation 52 requires that before any action can be taken under Regulation 51, the regulator is to notify the inspector or the electrician concerned. Regulation 53, Madam Speaker, states that the regulator is to provide access to the digital system to the single buyer, supply licensee, self-generator, or the owner for the purpose of viewing the completion certificates and compliance certificates. Regulation 54 states that the single buyer or supply licensee or self-generator or the owner is to report an incident which has caused or likely to cause the loss of life or injury to a person or any damage to the premises to the regulator. The report is to be made 24 hours of occurrence of the incident. Regulation 55, Madam Speaker, outlines that a single buyer or supply licensee is to carry out work in accordance with the specifications on the transmission and distribution lines and keep a record of all works carried and make available to the regulator. The period of the 2 years after the coming into operation of these regulations is to be brought against a public officer who immediately before the coming into operation of these regulations is duly authorized as an electrical inspector. Madam, Speaker, I now turn briefly to the schedules in the regulations. The first schedule is divided into 3 parts. Form 1 is a license application form for inspectors to be licensed in any of the 3 given classes and referred to in Regulations 5, 14, and 22. Form 2 is a registration application form for an electrician to be registered in any of the 3 given categories, which registration is referred to in Regulation 4. Form 3 is the enrollment application form for the technical electrical assistant referred to in Regulation 22. Schedule 2, Madam Speaker, specifies the applicable fees for Regulations 5, 6, 14, 15, 22, and 30. Application fee for a license of an inspector, 15,000 Jamaican dollars. Application fee for registration of an electrician, $10,000. Application fee for an enrollment of a technical electrical assistant, $3,000. License fee for inspector class 1, $30,000. Class 2, $20,000. Class 3, $15,000. Registration fee for an electrician, Category 1, $30,000. Category 2, $20,000. Category 3, $15,000. Enrollment fee for a technical electrical assistant, $1,500. Examination fee for a new license, $20,000. For a new registration, $15,000. Madam Speaker, the third schedule is referred to in Regulation 14 and 22 and is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 sets out the qualifications for an inspector for the 3 types of license classes, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Part 2 sets out qualifications for an electrician for these 3 categories of registration: Category 1, registration; Category 2, registration; and Category 3, registration. And Part 3 sets out the qualifications for a technical electrical assistant. Fourth schedule, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, contains a form of notice to be provided by inspectors and TEAs of their intention to surrender license or enrollment, or an electrician's request to deregister pursuant to Regulations 11, 29, and 19 respectively. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, through the passing of the Electrical Work Registration and License Regulations 2020, the Government of Jamaica will facilitate the modernization and efficiency of the electricity sector, increase compliance and industry safety, and improve Jamaica's competitiveness in doing business in the global sphere. I therefore seek the support of the members of this Honorable House in passing the regulation, subject to any amendments made here today. No, Mr. Speaker, we'll take it, Madam Speaker, we'll take it right through. I think the opposition spokesperson has a few words to say, and then we can proceed. I almost said opposition leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I don't want to get in the habit of commending the minister all the time, but I want to commend him on this occasion for the alacrity with which he has undertaken this new portfolio. Later on, I'm going to make some critical remarks, but it really won't be laid at his feet, seeing that he's a new minister. I want to thank him also because it's not often, Madam Speaker, that a minister allows the opposition counterpart to have full access to his staff. And the minister was unhesitating. In fact, the minister was the one who suggested that I met with all the critical staff members on this matter, and at no time did I feel that I did not have full access to ask questions, and I want to commend him because that is how you're going to secure cooperation and, after all, good governance. Yes. I'm still urging the House leader to review the matter of the chairmanship of the committees, oversight committees, and I intend to, even just by way of a sentence, when I speak on these matters, because it is so fundamental and important, to remind the government that if you really are striving for good governance, there are certain things that you need to do. The minister has put this level of cooperation in place, and I commend him. We're not going to see eye to eye on everything. In fact, I anxiously await his presentation on the matter of Petrojam, but that's another matter when it comes up. Also, Madam Speaker, I want to note, because today we are looking at the Electricity Act, which was passed in 2015, and it was actually replacing a law that was on the statute books for 125 years. So we were attempting to do fundamental reforms in the electricity sector. But, Madam Speaker, it was noted at the time that the law was passed that we could not have achieved everything at that time. And so the law itself mandated, and I really want the minister to be cognizant of this because by Section 60, it mandated a review of the law by way of a joint select committee of Parliament. The law was passed in the Senate in July 2015, July 25 to be exact. I'm not too sure on the exact appointed date, but we are now past 5 years since the law has mandated its own review. I believe that this is sort of fundamental part of our national life, that we need to ensure that this review be done and be done expeditiously. And it is by way of a joint select committee of Parliament. There are some important issues that we are contending with now that I believe require that review to happen. One of the most important features of the 2015 law is to mandate new provisions under the JPSC licenses. The JPSC license would have been issued in 2002. We reviewed them, and there are some important changes. I think those changes ought to be reviewed, but also we need to insist that some of the changes that were mandated by the law, that they are actually enacted and implemented. I note with interest, Madam Speaker, the recent Court of Appeal decision in relation to the residents of Hope Pastures about the need for us to have underground electricity supplies to deal with the problem that we have in our country and elsewhere of damage to electrical lines in the event of significant weather event. I think it's a matter that the Parliament, in this review that is mandated, should contend with. I think also the issue of streetlights. You know, under the new law, and the Minister of Local Government has perked up, we here ought to by now be able to go on our tablet computer to see which lights are functioning and which are not functioning. Right now we have to go out there to check, but the system is supposed to be transformed into a smart system so that we wouldn't have to send people out to check. We should by now be able to know in our constituencies how many street lights not working. And that has not yet happened, and it was envisaged that it would happen. There are some important other issues under the law that ought to be reviewed. The matter of renewable energy is one. There was a national mandate to achieve 30% renewables. The government is thinking of 50%. You have to change the law to mandate that and to give proper effect to it. As also issues relating to net billing and also the issue of wheeling. So, Madam Speaker, there are many issues dealing with the energy sector, and in particular the electricity sector, that now require a review, and the law mandates it. So I'm urging the Minister as soon as possible to come back to this House to propose the establishment of a joint select committee to do so. On to these regulations. And again, I start by noting that these regulations are 5 years old. These are very important and fundamental matters to deal with how we do business in this country, how we live, because electricity is such a crucial part of this. I remember when we were doing the reforms, the member from Western St. Andrew, who at the time was the minister who was dealing with doing business surveys, he was the one who pushed me to ensure that the issues governing how people receive electricity, Madam Speaker, these regulations should have been implemented long ago. Not blaming the current minister, but noting that as a way of pointing out the continuing inefficiency of government and how we function. So Section 55(1) of the law gives the minister powers to bring to this House regulations, and we wanted to ensure that these regulations were subject to a positive vote. So they come here, we look at them, and we vote on them. They're not taken in secrecy. And these regulations relate primarily to Section 10 of the Energy Electricity Law, Sections 48 and 49, which establishes this new institution, this new regulator, now known as the General Electrical Regulator. And again, it is being established to provide greater transparency, to ensure greater efficiency. This GR is going to be publishing a list of all the inspectors, 1,200, and electricians. And one of its major functions is to ensure the safety of electricity systems that are established both in homes and in businesses. Madam Speaker, so many of our fires in my constituency and across, I'm sure, all of our constituencies, those fires are due to improper wiring of homes. This law and the regulations are seeking to correct that. And I'm very pleased, Madam Speaker, with the level of penalties that go with these provisions. For example, the offense has been created of working without license and registration. This is a very important one, right? There are people who are practicing to be electricians and that they don't have the requisite qualification. And I know, because people complain that the test is difficult, but if you want to wire people's houses, you really ought to go through the training and, of course, the examination to prove it. So the penalties now are going to be severe. And not only must you be qualified initially, but you must maintain the qualifications. You must update the license, and it's going to be published out there so everybody can see it. You know, one of the functions now, Madam Speaker, as the government acknowledged then, and still do that, government can't do this all on its own. So we are now outsourcing. We are privatizing some of the functions. But what the government has to guarantee is that the standards are maintained and rules and regulations are in place to ensure that the system has the efficacy that we're seeking. I'm not going to go through, the minister has quite capably gone through all the provisions in the regulations. I support them, we support them. We believe, as difficult as the penalties are, that because of the issue of transparency and safety, you really do need to prevent persons who would otherwise want to breach a system from doing so. And very importantly now, it enables greater expedition so that you don't have to wait, Madam Speaker, for weeks and months to get your house properly wired and inspected. The system now enables you to do that. But it provides for significant breaches, penalties, if you breach it. And it requires, therefore, Mr. Minister, a public education effort, which I would urge that you proceed in earnest, not only to warn against those would-be inspectors and electricians, but consumers to beware, to protect themselves, and to ensure that they use the system that is being created now for their full and total protection. Again, Madam Speaker, I wish to urge that the review of the law be seen as paramount, and that we need now to have that Joint Select Committee in place to secure the review so that further and better changes can be done to enable us to have an electricity system that we can truly be proud of. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to join my colleague member for East Kingston and Port Royal in supporting these regulations that have been a while coming, as he's pointed out, but it's very important that we note the occasion when we are able to approve in this House important regulations that support the efficacy of legislation. I was involved in the development of the legislation, the Electricity Act, working with the minister at the time, and it was a very far-reaching overhaul of the system of regulating the electricity sector in the country. And the provision to which he has referred, requiring the Act to be reviewed within a certain period of time, is an important provision. It is a provision that we typically put in legislation which is either experimental or far-reaching, and it enables the Parliament to review how well or otherwise the legislation has been working, and perhaps sometimes it's regulating an area which is very fast-moving, and sometimes further adjustments are required because of technology having evolved or practices having changed in a fast-paced world. So I join the member in calling for that Joint Select Committee to be established quickly. It doesn't need to be a very lengthy review, but it's an important review nonetheless. The main reason I am standing to say a few words today, Madam Speaker, relates to the whole question of bringing informal users of electricity into the formal sector. In my constituency, I have this year encountered significant challenges in that regard, where communities have a large number of persons who are not regular customers of the JPS. Many of them would like to regularize their status and become customers because of the risks that they take in not being formal customers, both from the point of view of action that may be taken against them by the law enforcement, but also the risks involved in having houses which are not formally wired and passed, and the frequency with which fires occur as a result of that. And up to yesterday in my constituency, despite the deluge that was affecting Jamaica over the last few years, we had a fire yesterday morning in the constituency, and 3 homes were destroyed, completely destroyed. Thank God nobody was hurt, but it looks like it was an electrical fire, though we do not know for sure yet. The reason I wanted to speak on this today is to urge the government to put in place some support for low-income households that want to regularize their electricity status. This has been done from time to time in the past. We did it when we were in government, and indeed I got some support this year for a program that was partially done through the Ministry of Energy, and Minister Williams in her former position is aware of that, and partially done through JSIF. But the amount of the resources that were made available, and this is not a criticism at all, it's just what was available at the time, was really a bit of a drop in the bucket, because the number of homes that it could address was a small fraction of the total number of households that wanted assistance to regularize their status. And the inspectorate costs are a significant part of the costs of regularizing. So there is a house wiring aspect of it and the purchasing of the materials, the wires and so on that need to be put in place, paying the electrician to do it. But there's also the cost of getting it inspected and passed so that JPS can come and make the connection. And I would say there are tremendous social benefits and economic benefits to having persons come onto the formal grid in the regulated way. For one, they become paying customers of JPS and will help to reduce the losses that JPS passes on to other consumers by growing the base of paying customers for JPS. And there's a national interest in that, because the more that persons remain outside of the base of revenue for JPS, the more of the burden has to be passed on to those who are inside the base of paying customers. So there is a public interest in expanding the formal inclusion of ratepayers. And so from that perspective, there's a good reason why the government should try to support and subsidize, in effect, the costs of coming on to the grid in a formal way. Apart from that, there is the social benefits of ensuring that houses are properly wired. And this is a very important thing, because in some of these communities, they are densely populated areas. The housing stock is old, some of it is dilapidated. And it is really a miracle that we don't have more tragic fires resulting in injuries and death than we have. I mean, the proliferation of fires, certainly in my constituency and constituencies like mine, is a frightening prospect for anybody living there and for the Member of Parliament. And I would really like to see a program, a very deliberate and adequately funded program, put in place to ensure that all families, all households, the cost of electricity that is not being paid for, as well as affording those families a way of being in the formal system and for example, many instances, proof of address is a requirement for all sorts of things that individuals need to do now to interface with the state, interface with the financial system, and so on. And being a customer of JPS is one way in which a family or a householder can show that they can prove their address. Without that, they may be unable to do so, because in many of these instances, the properties are not in the names of the occupants, and the occupants may have been living there for their entire lifetime and the lifetime or most of the lifetime of their parents, but there is no titling yet in place for them. And that's a whole other story, which is also very important. But I would argue that there are tremendous benefits from bringing in persons into the formal system. It's not just about digitizing, that's very important too, and the Minister of Finance has spoken to that, and I support that process. But this is another area where inclusion into the formal system will have tremendous social and other benefits and economic benefits. And I urge the government to find a program, develop a program, or reinstitute a past program that would enable more low-income households who are really operating and living on the fringes of economic existence, the opportunity to become formal JPS customers at a cost that is manageable and not prohibitive to them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member.
Madam Speaker, I just want to make some very brief remarks in support of the regulation. It is long overdue, as was said, but very, very important. Madam Speaker, this is one of the more meaningful regulations because, as was mentioned by the speakers before me, the scope of these regulations touches on a range of our lives, the domestic, of our social and economic life in this country. And I want to give support to the speaker for me from South St. Andrew about the critical need, Minister, for a fund to address and to assist the regularization of the large swaths of our community into the formal system. And one of the barriers I am aware of is the cost of the wiring of houses and the inspectorate charges. And so I join the call for something meaningful to be done in this area to allow for this to happen as quickly as is possible, because the benefits of that are quite significant, not only to the individual but to the economy as a whole. Touching on the economy, Minister, the minister, the former minister and the spokesperson on energy correctly recalls that it was an assessment, ongoing assessment about our competitiveness and Jamaica's competitiveness in the global space. To our competitiveness and the whole aspect of doing business in Jamaica. And so the impact is not only on the social dimension and the individual dimension, but for industry and for the economy as a whole. And so whilst it is late, it is very important that we are today at this juncture. And I also join the cause that we have this continuing review, because it is through this updating of the laws and the regulation that we are going to be addressing some of the barriers to our own economy.
Jamaica, home of the resilient, passionate and hard-working. A people and a nation who have achieved and defied all odds, working to keep their economy growing, their country thriving, from investments made in innovative opportunities and exports demanded globally. We have a vision, now within our grasp, where Jamaica becomes the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. We will not let go of this vision. We will grow. We will overcome these challenging times and look to the future with hope and positivity. These are special times. The world as we know it has changed, but home will always be in our hearts. And in Jamaica, you can always find a home. Think you know Jamaica? Look again. You will be surprised.
Tourism doesn't exist by itself. Tourism happens only because a whole range of other economic activities are taking place. Having tourism is to ensure that there can be growth in almost every economic sector. The small craft vendors and the small foodies on the street corner who make some of the most delicious and most delectable cuisines that we could want. One of the things that is important to ensure that tourism is inclusive is that the inputs that are required for tourism must be sourced locally. Made by Jamaicans, originates in Jamaica, and is sourced in Jamaica. Tourism is working for you, is working for me, it's working for all of us.
Those against, the ayes have it. Motion approved.
I think the member from Clarendon Southwest had intimated, the member from Northern Trelawney and from Eastern Hanover, and those are the ones who have intimated that they would like to make contribution, Madam Speaker. But others can, and the member from St. Andrew Southeast. Right. But other members who would like to make contribution. Before I close, please go ahead.
Madam Speaker.
Yes, member.
I wanted to talk on this one. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill shortly entitled the Dog's Liability for Attacks Act, has come at a time when I think the nation has been outraged by some incidents in which innocent persons have been attacked by vicious dogs and suffered severe injuries or even death. And this has necessitated legislative action to protect the public from that. I think when we approach legislation like this, we have to be very careful to ensure that we strike the right balance, because we want to ensure that we don't create undue or heavy legal liabilities on dog owners that become a disincentive to have dogs. Dogs are a man's best friend or a woman's best friend, and there is a tremendous bond of love, unconditional love between a dog and their owner typically. We don't want to make it too unduly risky for persons to keep dogs. I don't think there's a public interest in that. So striking the right balance is important. And I have a few comments on the bill as tabled in that regard. First of all, I would just note, Madam Speaker, that there's a definition of the word attack in the Act, and that is an important term in the Act, as is the word injury. An attack and injury are two different things, because an attack is defined as including any circumstance which does not result in injury, but which creates a reasonable apprehension of injury. So an attack can take place without anybody being bitten, as long as this threshold of the person has a reasonable apprehension that they might be bitten. And if that is the case, then that's deemed by this legislation to be an attack. I mention that because under Clause 6 of the bill, it is a criminal offense, and quite a serious offense, on the part of an owner. And the whole question of who is an owner is an issue which others may wish to speak to. But suffice to say that in the Jamaican context, it may not always be clear who is the owner of a dog. And because of the way the law is written, you may find that there are more than one person who are deemed to be owners of the dog. And so this is an important point. But the Clause 6 of the bill makes it a criminal offense of the owner if the dog attacks an individual other than at the home or place where the dog is kept, normally, where the dog lives, in other words. And as I've said, an attack includes any circumstance which does not result in injury. So the effect of Clause 6, in tandem with the definition of attack, is that somebody, an owner of a dog, can face criminal liability, including imprisonment, if the dog frightens somebody but doesn't actually injure them. And I think this is an important point, because this is unusual and I think might be said to go a bit far. If you look at Clause 8, 1b, the offense under Section 6, which is if your dog attacks somebody, and remember that doesn't necessarily involve anybody being bitten or hurt. The offense under Section 6 is punishable by a fine of up to $1 million or imprisonment for up to 6 months in any case where the attack does not result in injury to an individual and the accused had been previously warned under Section 10, whether or not in respect of that dog or some other dog. There's a procedure under Section 10 where a person who is a victim of an attack, whether they're injured or not, can report it to the police, and the police can warn the owner. And in some circumstances, if in the future there is an attack by that dog, even if the person is not injured, that owner is criminally liable and could be imprisoned for it for up to 6 months and fined up to $1 million. And that is a serious issue for dog owners to contemplate. The other point I would make in relation to liability is the provision creates what we call strict liability. The person who was in the wrong has to pay for the loss and damage. And if there's more than one person who's wrong, it is apportioned. And there's a statute that deals with the apportionment by what's called contributory negligence. In this instance, the fault is irrelevant because 5.1c says it's not necessary to show that the injury was attributable to the neglect of the owner. So once a dog causes an injury, the owner is strictly liable for that, whether or not the owner can be said to have been at fault. I'm not really criticizing that because I can see why it is that we want to protect persons. And if you own a dog, which is a potentially an animal that can bite someone, then it's only fair that if they do that and injure someone, that you are responsible whether you're at fault or not. But criminal liability is quite a different thing. And I feel that to impose criminal liability on an owner when somebody is not hurt or injured, I think goes too far. That's my own view on the matter. I just wanted to make another point here, which is in relation to Clause 10 of the bill. And Clause 10 is dealing with these reports and says that an individual who is attacked by a dog who has witnessed such an attack may report the attack to a constable. And remember, and then subsection 2 there says that the constable who receives that report has to investigate it, and if the investigation determines that the individual was attacked but did not result in injury and that the owner of the dog had not previously been warned, then the constable can issue a warning. And of course, if that warning has been issued and the dog subsequently attacks someone, even if it doesn't injure someone, criminal liability flows under Section 6 and Section 8. The point I want to make in relation to 10, Minister, is that there's no reference to the location in which the attack takes place in Clause 10. In 6, in both 6, and which is dealing with criminal liability, and 5, which is dealing with civil liability, liability, whether civil or criminal, only arises where the attack or injury takes place other than the premises or part thereof where the dog is kept or permitted to live or remain. But the warning procedure isn't so limited, and I wasn't sure why that was. Since the warning ties into the circumstances in which criminal liability may flow even where an injury hasn't taken place, it seems to me that it ought to reference the location in the same way that the section that created the liability references it, which is in the wording in 5.1 and the wording in 6.1 as well. Both 6.1 and 5.1 dealing with criminal and civil liability refer to the geographic location where the attack or injury takes place, but 10 does not. And the last point I want to make on the bill, Minister, in relation to Clause 8, deals with the issue of sentencing. There is nothing in the Act that sets out any criteria that the court should consider when approaching the matter of sentencing. And I think in the context of dog ownership, which is pervasive, many families in Jamaica have dogs. Some have it for security.
Member, can I ask you just to lower your, can I ask the members just to lower your voices just a little? Can't hear the member.
Yeah. So I think that in the context of a statute that's dealing with, which is criminalizing ownership of dogs where the dogs attack or injure somebody, or don't injure in the case that I've already adverted to. The question of how the court should approach sentencing, I think, ought to be addressed in the statute. In particular, I think that if there is no history of the particular dog having demonstrated any propensity to attack anybody before, I think that ought to be something that the court has to take into account in deciding whether or not, for example, to impose a term of imprisonment on the owner. There's nothing in the Act that deals with that. There are some criteria in Section 9, Clause 9, where the court is deciding whether to order the dog to be killed or some other measure to be taken in relation to the dog itself. There's some criteria that apply there in 9.2. But in relation to sentencing of the owner, there's nothing. It's silent on it. And I think that there ought to be something in there that gives the court some direction as to the circumstances. It's quite common nowadays in statutes to list issues that the court should take into account in approaching the issue of sentencing. And I think in this instance, because of, as I've said, dog ownership is so pervasive, and this is such a radical departure from the current law by way of imposing criminal liability on owners of dogs where the dog attacks, whether or not there's an injury in certain circumstances, I do think that the court ought to be directed in the statute to take into account the past history of that particular dog, because it seems to me to be a very relevant consideration when you're deciding how to treat with the owner in criminal liability, whether or not the dog has previously ever bitten anyone or ever shaped to bite somebody before. And sometimes dogs can react unpredictably based on the look or whatever, who knows what the circumstances are. And a dog that has never bitten anybody before, someone, and you're hurried to bring this bill here because of the horrific events that we all know about. And there's been more than one such instance in recent times. So legislation is necessary. But dog ownership is also very important. And I think we need to strike the right balance. And in my view, there are aspects of the bill that go a little bit too far, and I'd like to see some adjustments. I see you've tabled some amendments. We just got them. I haven't had a chance to see what they do. But I commend to you the ideas that I have shared with you in this presentation. Thank you, Minister.
Madam Speaker, I want to pick up where my colleague left off, and it's the same issue of the definition of attack and the apprehension of injury. And I just want to share some examples, and I speak as a owner, a lover, and an unabashed dog man. Now, if you are walking your dog on a leash, dog man, yeah man. If you are walking your dog on a leash responsibly, and someone walks past you, let's say you're on your road, and that person agitates the dog, and the dog barks or growls, that could be perceived as an apprehension of injury and could be perceived as an attack, which the owner would be liable for. If you're carrying your dog to the vet and you are in an open back van, for example, and you stop at a traffic light and again someone agitates the dog and the dog either barks or growls, again, that can be perceived as an attack. So like my colleague, I understand the need for the legislation, but these aspects of it are definitely an overreach. I think if you look at the cases, responsible dog owners tend to ensure that their dogs are kept within their homes. They ensure their homes are safe for responsible dog owners. And if you think of the attacks, however horrific they are, they tend not to be from what I would call responsible dog owners. And I think we're placing an unfair burden on these responsible dog owners. And again, to have criminal liability in cases where there is no injury to an individual is extremely excessive. Extremely excessive. Within our society, dogs are not just companions. They are, for many persons, security at their home. And they are probably, I would regard as probably the best form of security you can have at your home. So people use and have dogs for many different reasons. And I don't think the particular clause that is in here is, I think it's, as I said, overreaches, and it's certainly too great a burden, I think, when there has been actually no injury. So like my colleague, I would ask the minister to look at amending, and I'm told we just got some amendments here that address that specific issue and ensure that there's balance in the legislation. Thank you.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in relation to the proposed bill, it can be broken down into two components. One, a civil liability component, and two, a criminal liability component. And I will join with my colleagues in the complaint as it relates to the criminal liability component, because the establishment of civil liability is trite. It has always been on the books, and this is just a repeal of the existing legislation to make way for the addition of a criminal liability component. And my complaint as it relates to the civil liability component is very small. One, there's no provision for joint and several ownership, and therefore joint and several responsibility. And that should be considered, because it can be that only one person is considered as an owner of a dog. You may have joint ownership, and under those circumstances, you have to make provisions for joint and several ownership. Secondly, there's no reference to the standard of proof, which, as you know, Minister, is a balance of probabilities, but out of an abundance of caution, I believe that should be included. And I make the reference because if you look at the defenses have been pooled together, which I believe is very untidy. Given the fact that we understand and are aware that the standard of proof for criminal offenses and the standard of proof for civil offenses are different. One is a balance of probabilities, and the other is beyond reasonable doubt. So to pool the defenses together in Clause 7 to me is a bit untidy. I received the amendments, and I note that under Clause 7, you have added D. And I had actually have it here written down to propose that the defense is that the defense be added, the attack by the dog was in immediate response to and wholly induced by the intentional provocation of the dog by the individual attacked. So I realize that you have actually taken that into consideration, and that is a part of the amendment, a proposed amendment. But that is one of the contributions I came here to make today. As it relates to the criminal liability component as well, we're looking at the defense, the orders that can be made by the court. And I'm proposing that an order be included where an order prohibiting the owner from owning another dog during a specified period of time. So the judge should be given that option as well, because that's very important. As it relates to the criminal liability, I am very cautious as it relates to that, because one, and two, the fact that somebody may use this legislation as a sword. Somebody with an ulterior motive in mind may go to the police and say, I apprehended fear. The constable then can say, okay, all right, you apprehended fear, and then warn the person. And the person realizes that they can use the law as a sword against his neighbor, somebody who has an ulterior motive against, and go back again to the constable, and then that person is charged. We have a lot of instances in this country where young persons have gone to the embassy and can't get a visa because of a criminal conviction. So the imposition of criminal liability, to my mind, is something that we have to be very careful about, particularly as it relates to dog attacks. Who goes to a location and retrieves that dog, he can't carry it to the police station and tie him up. There must be provisions in place to ensure that there's somewhere we can carry that dog to. And I believe those regulations are extremely important and should be given due consideration. It's extremely important. And so, Minister, those are my contributions, and I hope that you take a keen look at them and take them into consideration. I thank you. Where, man? Where?
I'm waiting to be acknowledged.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, I rise to make a contribution and support this bill. While I note the comments of my friends, it must be noted that Section 6, where it reads, where a dog attacks, if it is that the word is replaced by injure, then all the concerns that you have will be readily addressed. The bill, I find, is a perfect balance between the rights of dog owners as well as that of aggrieved persons. While it addresses the rights of dog owners, it gives controls, duties, liabilities, and subsequently penalties. An aggrieved person is not without recourse, and this is aptly contained in sections 5 and 6. What was my main concern, especially as I consider it to be one of our rural realities, was the omission of livestock. I note that the minister has, by way of amendment, now included this. The only other point I'd make, Madam Speaker, is in relation to Section 10. Again, this section speaks to different scenarios, and again, the amendment as outlined by the minister, now removing the role of the Justice of the Peace, adequately addresses and allows the parish judge, instead of the Justice of the Peace, to come in and make a determination as to whether or not the dog is in fact responsible. Madam Speaker, apart from a few tweaks which can easily resolve that which is that which was addressed earlier, this bill is in fact a perfectly balanced one. I thank you.
Madam Speaker, without going through all that was said previously by members, I do support the member from St. Andrew Southern as it relates to Clause 6, which speaks to the criminal liability where attacks are concerned. But outside of that, my main issue was as it relates to livestock. Over the weekend, I had an opportunity to listen to farmers within Trelawney, and one of the main issues that they face was injury to their livestock. In the current legislation, the Dogs Liability for Injuries Act, the 1877 Act, there was provision made for injuries to person, cattle, or sheep. But in the current bill, there was no reference made to livestock. There is an amendment that has been put before us now that includes livestock, which I'm very happy for, Minister. But as it relates to the definition of injury, I believe the amendment will cause more confusion. What is being proposed is that the definition of injury, as it is now in the bill, be kept, but just include livestock and domestic pets within this current definition. I think it will clear up a lot, and it will not cause too much of confusion for persons reading the legislation. Outside of that, Madam Speaker, I support the bill.
Madam Speaker, I propose to close the debate, but in light of the various proposals that have been put forward, I will not go to committee this evening. In other words, I will respond to some of the points and indicate my position in relation to them, and then we will have a further discussion with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel and I will also consult with those who have made contributions in terms of any other variation to the bill or to the proposed amendment so that we get a consensus at the committee stage. So after my closing remarks, Madam Speaker, I hope to ask for further adjournment, and then when we return, we go to the committee stage. Madam Speaker, this bill is not meant to create criminals. This bill is basically meant to engender, to encourage, and if necessary, enforce responsibility in the ownership of dogs. I say, Madam Speaker, that if dog owners really ensure that they control their dogs, keep their dogs in the private space, care for their dogs, and in those circumstances, Madam Speaker, there will be no problems. Madam Speaker, nowadays we see far too many dogs in the public space, running up and down on the street, chasing persons who are going about their normal business. And Madam Speaker, it's just not right when you see persons walking about in the public space, our helpers and gardeners, coming up various residents, and dogs chase them, and Madam Speaker, to see the poor helpers and gardeners having to jump fence. It's not right. And I say, Madam Speaker, we have had the harrowing information and knowledge of how many persons have been injured by dog attacks. And what I say, Madam Speaker, the bill is a quasi-criminal bill in most cases. Somewhat like traffic offenses, it's a regulatory bill to be a strong deterrent and to encourage dog owners to ensure that they keep and maintain their dogs in their private property. Madam Speaker, the vast majority of dogs, if not all, have owners. And what happens, Madam Speaker, is that these owners do not take full responsibility for them or action to maintain them. And what we're asking in this bill, Madam Speaker, is that dog owners, when you keep them in your private property, make sure that the fences are tough enough that they don't break through the fences, or high enough that they don't jump the fence. Because the truth of the matter, Madam Speaker, especially at mating time, dogs will jump high fences, and they will certainly cut through fences. So dog owners will have to ensure that the fences are properly secured so that the dogs don't go on the street. Again, Madam Speaker, there are persons who have said, what happens if someone negligently or inadvertently leave the gate open and the dog escape? No, what is the pedestrian who is chased or injured? Is that the fault of the pedestrian or the bystander when the dog escapes? It seems to me, Madam Speaker, that dog owners must appreciate that if a dog should escape or has the possibility of escaping because the gate is left open, that they must ensure that the dog at least is tied during the course of the day, or that the dog is muzzled, as the case may be. But we have, Madam Speaker, too many cases of persons being seriously injured. And the truth of it, member from South West Clarendon, the Dog Liability Act of 1877, which is now being repealed, has always been there. But with that civil liability, look what has happened. It has not been a deterrent. And if the civil liability is not a deterrent to all the damage and injuries that dogs have caused in this country, it is the people of this country are asking what should be done to stop the rampage that so many dogs engage in across Jamaica. And I say, Madam Speaker, this act is meant to send a signal to dog owners. There's not only civil liability if dogs injure innocent bystanders, because let me put it, if the bystander or the pedestrian provoke the dogs, it could be a good defense. So we're talking about innocent bystanders or pedestrians where the dogs attack them through no fault of theirs. And it seemed to me, Madam Speaker, yes, there's civil liability, but I believe that there is the need for the deterrent effect of the criminal law to say you must control your dog. And the member from St. Andrews South, we're going to impose criminal liability where there's no injury. Remember, nothing is more painful than pride being lost. Let me tell you something. When you have to run and a dog chasing you down, I've had it. And you have to jump in your vehicle or jump on top of your car or climb a tree to avoid a dog attack. There's no injury, Madam Speaker. There's nothing you can claim in the civil court. But, Madam Speaker, is it right? And you have it in far too many communities. Where far too many communities, Madam Speaker, where owners leave their gates open. Leave their gates open.
Speaker, on a quick point of order, just to make the point that the definition of injury includes any impairment to physical or mental conditions. So if the person suffered nervous shock, for example, which is recognized in the law, as a result of a dog, not biting them, but frightening them so bad, that would be an actionable matter. And, yes, they could get civil recourse. So I'm just making the point that there is recourse already in the civil liability section for that kind of situation that you are outlining there. With such passion.
No, I am not denying that there's civil liability for that. But the question is, how many of these innocent bystanders, these innocent pedestrians, is going to go to court to take up this matter? The state needs to protect our citizens. And all I'm saying, Madam Speaker, in situations like this, we need to say to householders who keep dogs, and believe me, I would encourage dog ownership for security reasons. Not only for security reasons, but for the care and compassion that ownership of dog brings. So I have no problem with dog ownership, but dog owners must be responsible. And absolutely, it is personal, so, because I know of far too many cases where dogs have attacked and caused serious injury. I've never been hurt by a dog, but I've seen where dogs have caused injury to persons, and it seems to me, Madam Speaker, it is because the owners of dogs have not been sufficiently strict, sufficiently careful, have not put in place the necessary precaution, and therefore the dogs are allowed to escape the premises, to be on the street, and in those circumstances, Madam Speaker, our people, the citizens of this country, need to be protected. Now, Madam Speaker, we are going to look at the penalties, because the penalties are basically intended to be a deterrent. And it basically, no one intends to put dog owners in prison. It is the fine, or in case of default, the imprisonment is in case of default. So this act, Madam Speaker, is not intended to be this the normal criminal legislation. This act, Madam Speaker, is meant to be a regulatory act, strict liability, somewhat like traffic offenses, where when you breach the regulations, you're fined. But the fines in this case, Madam Speaker, are intended to be significant because you want to send a signal to dog owners that instead of paying a fine of $1 million, make sure that your dogs are secured either by the fence or by a leash or by a muzzle or on such other methods you can use to control and keep your dog in the private space. No, Madam Speaker, there are many issues about dogs that are on the street. The truth of the matter is, if the dog is on the street and there is an owner can be found, that owner will be responsible. Yes, member from South West Clarendon, there can be joint ownership if the dog is owned by several owners. That's not a problem, because the Act allows several joint ownership. No problem. But I say, Madam Speaker,
Member, can you
pause
yield
for a
sure. Madam Speaker, if I may, sorry to interrupt the member in his full strides. Not my intention so to do, but I must comment. First of all, I think it's an important issue, and I commend the member and his team and others who have contributed, and I want to thank him for yielding. The issue of stray dogs, Madam Speaker, I must tell you, my own personal experience is that I find that I fear more a dog without an apparent owner than one with an owner, Normally, and so the issue of stray dogs, the establishment of a pound, how do you deal with that? I get the impression that there are more dogs on the streets, in the public space, that survive on the streets and really have no owner. How do you establish the ownership? And they create an issue. And I'm arguing it not just from a personal, but also from a public health perspective. I've always been very concerned about these stray animals generally, but certainly in the case of dogs. I wondered if the member, in his consideration, because you did say you would not close today, that be mentioned or taken into consideration with more specifics around how to deal with that.
Madam Speaker, regrettably, my friend was not here at the opening of this debate. Because at the opening of this debate, I did say that this act was restricted to a particular type of activity where dogs attack innocent persons. But I did say then that I am in touch with both the Ministry of Local Government and the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of putting together additional legislation to deal with impounding or to amend and improve the legislation that deals with stray dogs and also the basic restriction, control, prohibition of breeding and so on. But may I say that I agree with you that stray dogs are problems, but it's not being dealt with by this legislation. It will be dealt with by additional legislations, that is the updating of other bills which will come to the House in due course. I would like to say though, Madam Speaker, in response to that point, dog owners should really take action to spay as many of their dogs as possible, especially if they don't intend to care for the puppies. There's no doubt, and something should be done eventually. How do we spay or neuter as many of the dogs as possible? Because that is the real cause of so many stray dogs. And that is something that hopefully we will look at in the next legislation. But for this legislation, Madam Speaker, the main intent and purpose is to emphasize to dog owners the importance of this bill, which means that all Jamaican homes should be aware of this bill. And I was very happy, Madam Speaker, that several members of the Veterinary Association, the Veterinary Medical Association, Dr. Ann Small, Dr. Kevin Walker, Dr. Paul Kedugan, Pamela Loss of the Jamaican Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and Attorney Jalil Dabdoob of the Jamaica Kennel Club, on behalf of the Jamaica Kennel Club, came to and discussed the bill, very supportive of the bill, made certain suggestions which were the ones that prompted certain amendments, but I accept that in light of the discussion here in Parliament, we will have further look at the law to make it, balance it as much as possible, as the member from St. Andrew South and South East St. Andrew are saying, because it's not a question of trying to criminalize dog owners. What we want to do is to engender responsibility in them, to let them know that those users of the public space, that they have a right to do so without fear or actual attack from the dogs that they keep. In other words, I've said it and I repeat, I support dog ownership. They're good security means. They, I mean, Madam Speaker, you know, one morning I came down and I smelled like what my wife is putting on a great breakfast. And I said, said my wife, this breakfast smells so good. She says, not for you, it is. It's not for you. No. Madam Speaker, much as I love these dogs, you can see the love that owners of dogs have for dogs. They treat them as well as members of the family. And I say, Madam Speaker, when you do that, whether it is in Upper St. Andrew, it must be done in all across Jamaica. And Madam Speaker, one of the reasons why we have to control our dogs is in the rural areas. The dogs are a major source of nuisance against livestock. And in those circumstances, the farmers are the ones begging us to control the dogs, because the dogs attack and cause chaos and havoc, chasing animals all over the place. And it seems to me, Madam Speaker, this is what we want for dog owners, to care, love them, control them. And once that is done, we can have a better appreciation of this bill and why we have to put in place strong deterrence. And Madam Speaker, as I said, we will postpone the bill and have a look at further balancing. Yes, member from St. Andrew South, I agree that the sentencing is the maximum we're looking at. And yes, some direction could be given to the court as to how they look at sentencing of offenders or dog owners. Because obviously, if the attack or injury was caused without the owner even knowing, then clearly, or it is because of some other reason the dog jumped the fence unknown to the owner, then there's no doubt the liability could be minimal, if you appreciate. But and that is why we put in a warning system first, where no injury is caused or where no actual injury is caused, so that if the dog chases persons on the street and the constable is informed, the constable warned first, so that the owner knows the dog is jumping the fence, therefore you have to increase the height of the fence, or that you have left the gates open and therefore you must take steps to make sure that the gate is closed when persons leave your home, because a warning is there first. So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members for their contributions and also for the points that have been raised. All the members have pointed various amendments that could be made so that this act can be more balanced and meaningful. And therefore, Madam Speaker, Leader of Government Business, I would ask for a suspension of the debate, or close the debate, but we won't go to committee stage until we have looked at some amendments, further amendments to the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister Chuck, before you go, would you be so kind as to ask for a second reading of the bill. So
That's
when we come to committee...
That's right,
yes.
Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, could I ask that the bill be read a second time?
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Dogs Liability for Injuries Act, Injuries by Act, and to provide for liability for attacks by dogs and for connected matters read a second time.
So we will suspend committee until the bill is until a future date. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier. Madam Speaker, the motions I'd love to take together, primarily those that relate to the sessional committees of the House, which would be the appointment of the Standing Orders Committee as indicated, the appointment of the Integrity Commission, Act of the Standing Orders, Madam Speaker, the appointment of the Standing Orders Committee and the appointment of the Integrity Committee. While at the same time, Madam Speaker, we could look at the amendment for approval of the Section 34 of the Integrity Commission Act. And just for the sake of members who might not have heard correctly because maybe of the mask, a member indicated that he probably might have heard me say 73B, but it's D, just to make sure that it is very clear in that regard. And of course, Madam Speaker, the exemption motion with regards to the members Mike Henry, Mark Golding, and Speaker Marissa Dalrymple. May it please you, Madam Speaker, in that regard, that we take all these motions together.
The question before us is that the standing order be suspended to allow us to take the following motions all together, both exemption motions. The appointment of the Standing Order Committee and Integrity Commission will go together. The Integrity Commission Committee and the amendment of Standing Order Committee. Oh, sorry. The appointment of the Standing Order Committee and the appointment of the Integrity Commission Committee. And as I said before, the exemption motions for the Honorable L.M. Henry, OJ, and the exemption motion for M. Golding. And also Mrs. Philibert on this, I remembered. And the exemption motion for Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the motions, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister is to make a statement to this Honorable House, and until he arrives, I ask that this House be suspended for 15 minutes to allow for the Prime Minister to arrive and make the statement.
The question is that the House be suspended for 15 minutes. Aye. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.